and welcome to the National Post. My name is Jamie Sarkonak, and I'm a columnist with the Post, and I'm here today with my colleagues Rahim, Mohamed, and Adam Zivo to talk about Trudeau's political future. And this is a particularly relevant topic in light of the recent budget, which only got about a 17% thumbs up from Ipsos poll respondents very recently. And in response, Trudeau seems to be aware of his situation. He's gone on a few podcasts lately to talk about all the good things he's done for Canada and his hope to remain in the driver's seat. So, Rahim and Adam, what is your general assessment of Trudeau's position post-budget?
I think it's interesting that he seems to be dipping his toe in the American podcast ecosystem. It seems almost as though he's testing out different post-political career paths. I know, for instance, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama signed a lucrative deal with Netflix that included a number of different properties. I believe among them were podcasts. Ditto for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. An interesting thing with Trudeau, assuming that the days are numbered in his political career, he's still a relatively young man. I believe he's just 52 years old. So to me, it seems as though he's reading the writing on the wall, and him sort of dipping his toe in podcasts like Vox Explains and Freakonomics. To me, he's testing, I think, the strength of his brand south of the border, and potentially we can see this lead to more opportunities for him in that American sort of podcast / streaming ecosystem.
His podcast appearances, I find that quite interesting because Trudeau hasn't been so forward, I guess, with small media. When Pierre Poilievre took the lead of the Conservatives, we saw him going on, for example, the Jordan Peterson podcast and making a splash that way, and Trudeau felt a lot more locked off. And now here he's being forward and present in the general sphere of things and enjoying the spotlight a bit more. So I find it's just interesting to see the change of tone. It's like he's trying to meet maybe the younger generation of voters where they are, instead of sticking with traditional television media where he would do his year-end interviews and such.
Well, I mean, if he's trying to engage with younger voters, he needs to focus on more concrete policies, because the sense from younger voters, at least what I'm seeing, is that they're tired of inauthenticity, and they're tired of fake solutions to very real problems that they're experiencing. Going on a podcast to appear young and hip is not going to make your rent more affordable. It's not going to change the fact that you've given up on buying a home. And until the Liberals are able to come up with concrete policy solutions that give younger voters a clear sense that their lives will turn around, I don't think any number of podcasts are going to rehabilitate his brand.
Yeah, and he talked about generational fairness in this recent budget. He talked about, I guess, improving the housing situation for young people, which just kind of feels, frankly, it feels a bit laughable to see the very small inches that are being gained on that front. And instead of coming up with a budget that people are going to feel like will help them, he's instead gone and tried to do the rhetorical games of appearing on a podcast and really bringing up, for example, I noticed this on his Vox podcast and another recent appearance, talking about things like climate, for example, which is something that the Liberals can very much say they've done a lot of, and say, well, any good climate policy is a good economic policy, so we're really helping you guys in the long run, even if it's very painful for you in the moment. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think an interesting thing about Trudeau is in many ways he makes a better antagonist for the Tucker Carlsons of the world than Joe Biden does. Joe Biden's in his 80s. Joe Biden, some of his positions and, his voting record as a senator, they don't fit especially well in a progressive box. When you look at things like Biden's role in mass incarceration in the 1990s with the Biden crime bill, you look at some of his policies surrounding the southern border with Mexico, currently his support for Israel in the war in Gaza. So Justin Trudeau is almost like that sort of progressive straw man, that emblem or avatar of wokeness that run amok. And you've even seen people like Bill Maher, who I would put, slightly to the left of the scale, take runs at Justin Trudeau. I think being a better exemplar of that archetype than Biden is. I think it's interesting with Obama out of the picture. Biden's never quite fit that mold quite as well. So a lot of your kind of right of center American pundits are looking at sort of Justin Trudeau as a kind of proxy for that sentiment. And for his part, Justin Trudeau seems to be leaning into that characterization. So I believe the title of his podcast with Vox was a social activist in Prime Minister's clothing. So he seems to be sort of leaning into this kind of Captain Woke framing that we're getting out of circles in the United States.
Well, one thing I want to interject with here is that we know that the Liberals have been trying to import the American culture wars to frame Pierre Poilievre as being Trump-like, given that Trump is so unpopular in Canada. And I wonder if on some level the Liberals understand that by having Trudeau appear in these American podcasts, that they might be baiting the American right to respond and building that connection between these two discourses. Do you guys think that perhaps could be a political strategy of theirs?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a Hail Mary, but there's a logic there. And it's interesting that you have a pretty well documented, cross-pollination between people who worked for Obama in 2008 and 2012, and people who went on and did work for Trudeau. So I think you have that pipeline, between the Trudeau Liberals and the Obama Democrats going into the Biden Democrats, that's already quite well established, and you have this cross-pollination of talent and ideas. So I think that's definitely within the realm of possibility, and it's definitely something, again, with sort of Justin Trudeau's multi-year obsession with exporting American culture wars to Canada, that would be in step with that broader strategy.
Yeah, in the short term, it seems like free money almost. Go down and kind of paint yourself as a maybe foil to Trump, which obviously doesn't play well in Canada for a lot of people. And expect success from that. Long term, I don't know how smart that is, because of course you're just defining your position in Canadian politics using an American foil. And also, if Trump becomes the president, is it wise to make yourself his foil? I would say very much probably not, because he'll be in charge if he wins for a while in the US, and we depend on that relationship very, very much. But look at their poll numbers. Look at their rather reactionary budget. I don't think that the current Liberals are very interested in long-term thinking beyond, with the exception of climate policy, of course, because we have electricity regulations that they're making for decades into the future. But beyond that, politically, it's very easy to say, short term, let's just go at the U.S. and see what we can pull out of this Trump debate, which is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely seeing a desperate Liberal government in survival mode. What's interesting is, for most of the past 8+ years, I would have said one thing the Trudeau Liberals tend to do well, irrespective of their policy choices and directions, has been comms. But I think you've seen a very desperate, a lack of coherence and a very panicked approach to comms as of late. So one example is the InfoWars host Alex Jones. Said, a lot of what Pierre Poilievre is saying, I'm saying. This would have been a few weeks ago. You still have a number of people in the Liberal war room sort of asking Trudeau, are you going to accept this endorsement? Are you going to rebuff this endorsement? Despite the fact that it doesn't seem to be getting any traction, you are seeing at this point the Liberals grasping at straws, paper straws.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that kind of approach to smear your opponents as far right and use any sort of tenuous connection to make that point doesn't play well, once again, when people are more concerned about bread and butter issues. When you can't afford to pay your rent, when you can't afford to buy a home, you're less likely to respond to this kind of culture war rhetoric.
So in the future, going forward, if Trudeau was to, well, I guess, first of all, do you see him running into the election with this? Or do you see him leaving for a different career? And if so, what would you guys predict that career to be, if anything? Let's start with Rahim.
Sure. So one thing I'll say is you can look at these podcast appearances as trying to reach out to millennials, but I don't know too many 20-somethings who are listening to the Freakonomics podcast. When Barack Obama was trying to sell Obamacare, he went on, to between two firms with Zach Galifianakis, which made sense for the millennial audience. I couldn't tell you what 20-somethings are doing. They're on TikTok. They may be watching other people play video games. So to me, it seems like he's reaching out to, that kind of upper middle income, older millennial, younger Gen X, that are subscribers to The Atlantic, that listen to the New York Times, The Daily, and potentially have deep pockets. So again, I think he's potentially angling for, a book deal, that Netflix deal, going the way of Obama, going the way of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, being sort of what's atypical for a Canadian statesman, having somewhat of a brand and a cachet and a attractiveness to that kind of upper crust American demographic. And I think those podcast appearances were more about appealing to that niche, I think, than the narrative of meeting young people where they are. I think he'll still, if it's up to him, I think he'll still lead the Liberals into the next election. But ultimately, I do think we're seeing a certain level of contingency planning on the part of Trudeau, who's, I think, waking up to the polling data, waking up to the political realities that in all likelihood, even if he does make it to the election and miraculously somehow pulls out a win, I don't see him making it through the entire term. So I see, his political career in the next year and a half, 2 years, more or less finished.
I don't think that he would voluntarily leave his position as leader of the party. I think that, it's a bit of a cliche that it seems as if there's no alternative candidate to take over his place, and that seems very intentional, right? Like, no one has really been groomed as his successor. And the Liberals have been trailing in the polls for almost a year now. And one would imagine that if they intended to replace Trudeau, they would have done so already. Time is running out for them to make that substitution. And as every month goes by, the chance that they could pull this off successfully diminishes. So I think at this point, they're kind of locked in with him, for better and for worse, which I guess spells a Conservative victory.
Sure. I mean, one thing I will add is I think you've seen over the past few weeks, you've seen stories planted in sympathetic kind of left-leaning outlets, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, hinting at organizing on the part of one Mark Carney or two Dominic LeBlanc. I think if they're going to go in a direction other than Trudeau, the latter is probably more likely, in that, LeBlanc is already a member of cabinet. He's well respected enough that this is a kind of save the furniture campaign. We're going to lose, but hopefully Dominic LeBlanc is going to avoid the kind of Kim Campbell, two-seat scenario. And, you burn Dominic LeBlanc, you still have that crop of somewhat younger, somewhat more attractive, appealing, Anita Anand, Melanie Jolie, Francois-Philippe Champagne. So I think if we are to see any sort of, first, I don't think it will be something Trudeau does voluntarily. And second, I think someone like LeBlanc, who can take that sort of caretaker role, would be the more likely choice if there were a change in leadership going into the next federal election.
It's kind of like I just watched Masters of the Air. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's a World War II TV series, and it's about, bomber pilots. And they're often in these situations where the engines go out and they got to land this thing in a field and not crash it and explode. And to me, it kind of feels like the Liberals are in that situation. If you're looking at the polling data, they're almost looking at third-party status. If we have a strong NDP and strong Bloc, and the Liberals are very popular among the older demographics, but if you look at how they do with young people, it's very much not good. So if they're to leave the next election, it's like you need enough people here and support that you can survive past being in third party status. And I kind of wonder if the next generation would, as they age, gravitate towards the Liberals in the future, like they kind of always have, if that makes sense.
Well, if we're going to see some sort of gravitation towards Liberals, I think Liberals will need to significantly rebrand and pull back to the center, because the type of liberalism, the type of liberal branding that we've seen over the past decade has become exhausting. And I think there's an appetite for a return to the liberalism that we saw back in the 2000s. One that is more focused on the responsible shepherding of the economy, protecting individual rights, and is not so preoccupied with virtue signaling.
Do you think that's possible, or do you think in the younger generation it's become so polarized along social policy lines that that might not be possible in the future?
I mean, look, politics is always cyclical, so I would imagine that the Conservatives will probably win a majority in 2025. By 2029, there'll be some discontent. Maybe they'll hold on to power for about 8 to 10 years, at which point, the Liberals will have ample time to rebrand, and it'll be very difficult to predict what will happen up in that future. But I think that whatever rebranding effort that the federal Liberals engage in, I think will be informed by the provincial Liberals in Ontario, because that's where we see the Liberal brand doing strongest at the provincial level. And I understand that, Bonnie Crombie is trying to champion that old school Liberal approach, to go back to the kind of like the business Liberals, where you have a coalition of red Tories and blue Grits.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a very sage observation, because in many ways, Kathleen Wynne was sort of a preview to Trudeau. If you look at that more social liberal approach, and even a lot of the staff, your Jerry Butts, a lot of kind of the Wynne Liberals ended up forming a nucleus of the Trudeau Liberals. So I think that feedback loop between the Ontario Liberals and federal Liberals, I think that's quite a on-point observation for Adam to make.
Interesting stuff. Well, we'll have to see, and in a few years we'll have to come back and see how our predictions played out. Well, that's all we have for time, you guys. So thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you,
Jamie.